the negotiations between India and the European Union over a free trade agreement, and those are the visuals that you're currently seeing with Prime Minister Narendra Modi along with Dr. S. Jaishankar, among others, sitting alongside Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, and also Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, laying the groundwork there for the mother of all trade deals, as they describe it, the free trade agreement between India and the European Union. The Union Minister for Commerce and Industry from India, Piyush Goyal, also in attendance as well. So those are some visuals that you're currently witnessing from the discussions that have taken place earlier this morning between the governments of India and the European Commission, as well as the European Council, over reaching a free trade agreement. What the contours of that agreement are going to be, what are some of the specifics that will emerge, we'll have to wait for an official press conference that is expected to take place in about 45 minutes to an hour from now. But let me get a word in from Srinjoy Chaudhary as well on these ongoing discussions. Srinjoy, if you can summarize to us the implications of what could be announced in, say,
it's a very big moment in terms of deals. It's not the Indian side that has said mother of all deals, it's the EU side, because they have an access to a market of 1.4 billion people. On the other hand, India will have a market to Europe, about 27 countries in Europe, many of them really big ones, G7 countries like Germany, like Italy, like France. So that is something that India will look forward to. But as far as the nuts and bolts of the deal is concerned, well, it surely will be announced today. Both sides will speak about it. But the signing of the deal, for that we will have to wait for a while. But surely about a quarter of the world's population will be involved in this. It will help the economies of all 28 countries. So naturally, it is a big deal. And we will have to say see what the nuts and bolts are, how India benefits, how Europe benefits. All of that we'll get to know fairly soon.
Absolutely, Srinjoy. We'll, of course, await that press conference as well. What the nitty-gritties are is something that could perhaps emerge sometime later, because the actual signing of the deal could take a few more months, according to certain reports. But the broad contours of the deal, what it's likely to entail, and what are the certain areas of sensitivity for both EU as well as India that this particular trade deal might steer clear of, well, that is something that could also emerge during the course of that press conference a little later in the day. India will, of course, also be seeking certain responses from the EU with respect to certain non-tariff barriers that exist in terms of regulatory mechanisms that the EU has already put in place. That includes the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is essentially a carbon tax that's levied on several countries that export to the EU. So what kind of clarity emerges on those bones of contention, we'll have to wait and see as well. Hina, as far as the EU goes, there are several non-tariff barriers that have actually kicked in over the last couple of years. And starting January 1st this year, there was already the carbon border adjustment mechanism that came into place, which might have implications for Indian exports to the EU. So while the broad contours of the trade deal will be announced when that press conference gets underway, India will specifically be seeking clarifications over some of these issues as well, as to whether some of these non-tariff trade barriers can be addressed too on the part of the EU.
Well, absolutely. What we have learned, Siddharth, is that it is being seen as a win-win situation for both India as well as the EU. In fact, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi called it a perfect example of partnership, the free trade agreement that's being signed between both of them after about 20-odd years of negotiations. The European Commission chief, in fact, has said that this is just the beginning. What both India and EU are doing today is just the beginning. Picture abhi baki hai. if I can borrow that phrase, because, you know, what we have seen so far, how India's auto sector has had, like, you know, very high import duties. So what this free trade agreement is also going to do is improve the market access. It's going to make the European cars in India much cheaper, which many people in India feel is not good for the Indian auto sector. But then some feel that it's going to add more competition to the India's auto sector as well. So that's going to be one of the biggest takeaways, Siddharth, as far as this free trade agreement is concerned. Of course, we are going to be looking forward to more details once the announcements begin from both the leaders. But this is one thing that we are going to be watching out for. So all the people who love to buy luxurious European cars, which currently attract an import duty of about 70 to 110%. And here I'm talking about the likes of Porsche, Maserati, etc., etc. There on that front, the import duty, India has, we have learned, agreed to bring it down to about 40%. And in the near future, it could even come down to about 10%. So that's going to be one of the biggest things that we'll be watching out for. Second important aspect is that how it's going to open up completely new and interesting market for India's textile and the jewelry sector. These two set of exporters were hit very, very badly because of US tariffs, and hence we will see new boost coming in for these two sectors as well. Already, if you look at the trade partnership between India and EU, last year in 2024-25, we had a trade surplus, something that every country really aspires to have. So we would like to build on it further, and that's something we are going to see in the announcements today.
Absolutely. We do have a trade surplus with the EU to the tune of almost $15 billion. We export almost $75 billion worth of goods to the EU out of a total trade of approximately $136 billion between India and the EU. Let me come across to Srinjoy as well. We'll wait for what the announcement actually is, Srinjoy, but purely from a strategic perspective and also from the perspective of mobility of talent in terms of skilled Indian workers finding employment in the EU as well as vice versa. What kind of implications does a possible trade deal between these two actually hold?
We have to wait and see. But this is something India wants. This is something the Prime Minister has been wanting for about 11 years. He believes that if so many people could go to West Asia and do so well, in this case, here people can be given training and a language capsule. The word language capsule was the one he himself spoke about. A language capsule, basically meaning French or Italian or German or Polish or whatever. And once they got that language capsule, they would be able to function very well in the West, in whichever EU country, and do well. Supposing the EU needs, let's say, 10,000 carpenters, let's say 10,000 plumbers. India has these 10,000 people who are very good at their work. And if they can move for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years to Europe and have that language skill, courtesy the language capsule that the Prime Minister spoke about, then very clearly they can flourish and both sides benefit. Indians will have jobs in the West, in all of Europe, 27 countries, and they desperately need people. The population of many countries is actually falling. So for these people, these trained technicians would be of great help.
Absolutely. Let me go across to Hina as well. Hina, we've signed a spate of free trade agreements. Of course, the signing of the India-EU free trade agreement in its totality might take some time because certain nitty-gritties will have to be worked out. We'll, of course, ask those questions at the time of the press conference as well. But New Zealand, on the 22nd of December 2025, we signed an FTA. We signed an FTA with the United Kingdom on the 24th of July 2025 and with Oman on the 18th of December 2025. So within a span of less than a year, we've signed 3 and another 4th one will be achieving fruition sometime towards the early part of 2026.
Well, absolutely. We have signed a couple of them, and there are a few that are on the anvil as well. And these are extremely important because even if we want to stay self-reliant in our Nirbhar, we cannot be isolated. We need global partners for trade and many other aspects. You know, a lot is happening around the world, how tariffs are being imposed literally left, right and center almost on a daily basis. At times, the world is waking up to a new tariff number. 100% tariff has become a new normal these days. So in times like these, in times of increasing turbulence, geopolitical uncertainty, India needs to protect its national interest, its own people. So how do we really do that? Suddenly, if there is something that goes wrong between, you know, the biggest economies in the world, the supply chains get impacted and hence our economy gets impacted directly. So what do? We are preparing for that kind of a situation, and that's the reason why these trade agreements matter, because these provide access to our industries, our manufacturers, you know, into new markets. For our exporters, it's a great news. Then there can also be a people-to-people connect that also, you know, opens up. Services exports, services imports is another important aspect that we are really looking at. And that is the strategy of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to safeguard the country from external shocks. Because see, we as a country cannot really change what's happening in the world. What we can do is protect our own interest, and that's exactly what we are doing. Around 15 odd trade pacts we have signed over the last couple of years. The number is only set to go up. By the way, this is also going to include the upcoming trade deal with India and the United States of America. Even though many are saying that, you know, the US president is going to be watching the developments closely, but at the same time, he is also keen to have a trade deal with India. And that is the reason why a lot of negotiations have happened on that front. Perhaps after this mother of all deals, we could see some good news as far as India and the US trade pact is concerned too.
Absolutely. Hina, please stay on with us. Let me also go across to geopolitical expert Madhav Nalapad joining us on the broadcast. Hina was talking about all aspects that include global shifts as well. So this is a historic economic partnership, sir, between India and the 27 EU countries at a time when we are witnessing massive turbulence when it comes to the global relationships and trade deals.
Look, quite frankly, I don't understand the mind of Donald Trump. On the one hand, his national security strategy policy points out China as a near peer. And of course, the United States knows very well that if China overtakes the United States in any way, well, that's the end of US primacy. And that could be the beginning of the end of the US dollar. Now, at the same time, as they acknowledge that China is almost a global peer, and essentially that they need to ensure that this does not happen. It does not equal the United States. The fact is, Trump is doing whatever he can to alienate his allies. He is going after India, going after Japan, going after the EU. All these countries are important where tackling China is concerned. And he is going after all these countries. So on the one hand, you've got his policy. On the other hand, you have his practice, which unfortunately is playing into the hands of China because antagonizing all his allies by threatening tariffs, threatening other restrictions, and so far, for example, on India, refusing to sign a trade deal that was basically worked out more than a month ago, according to my information. But President Trump is sitting on it. He's having the same kind of problem with the EU, same kind of problem with other countries. So on the one hand, you talk about China as a near peer, and on the other hand, you do whatever you can to alienate key allies, such as India, Japan, the EU. It's frankly a policy which is very difficult to understand. Thank you.
Right. Let me also go across to my colleague Srinjoy Chaudhary. We're talking about major economies here when we talk about this FTA between India and EU. And ultimately, for a viewer, Srinjoy, it all trickles down to how it is going to have an impact on ground and how will it make changes to their lives.
Yes, the most important thing, of course, is the possibility of Indians going to the EU countries and working there. Is that going to happen? Is that going to happen in a large way? Yes, we know a lot of Indian IT personnel go across to Europe. Yes, this is because of bilateral reasons. The Indians and the Germans have a very good tie-up. So a lot of people from the IT sector go to the Germans and Germany. So that's something that has happened in the past. But blanket, yes, welcome Indian IT personnel, welcome Indian technicians, welcome Indian workers. Is that going to happen? If that happens, it will change the lives of many Indians. Help Europe in a huge way because they have falling populations, they have very few young people left compared with India. So as a result, it benefits the EU countries a lot. Already there is a deal of sorts, one with Britain. That deal is a big one because Britain is one of the top 5-6 countries in the world economically. Also, it has a population of about 65-67 million people. Now that may be small by Indian standards, but it holds up very well in Europe compared, except perhaps Germany and maybe France. Britain has a population bigger than all the other EU countries. Thirdly, there is a deal that is already done with the smaller countries like Switzerland and Liechtenstein and all that. So that too has happened a while ago. While that of course affects very few countries and very few people, this one, which has been called mother of all deals by the EU, would affect 2 billion people, perhaps. Now that's important. But in what way? And what are the positives? These are things that we will get to know soon. We don't know as yet. We don't know as yet whether the things that India will import will come down.
Right.
Now what? Cars, not many Indians will buy a Maserati.
Let's then focus on the pointed questions. Hina, let me ask you a pointed question. Which are the sectors that are going to benefit?
Well, simply put, the biggest beneficiary is going to be, for example, the automobile sector. The luxury cars that we get from Europe specifically, they are going to get cheaper. Now, you'll ask me, how will they get cheaper? Currently, the import duty that we have on these luxury cars like Audi, Volvo, etc. of these car makers, it stands at 70 to 110%. Now, what we have learned is that Indian government has decided to bring this import duty down to 40%. So just imagine the import duty coming down from 70 to 110 to 40%, which is like a huge drop, which means these luxury cars like your Porsche, Maserati, etc., they are all going to get cheaper. Eventually, this 40% will get reduced to about 10%. Now, this is what we've learned. So this is sector number one, which is grabbing all the headlines today as far as India-EU FTA is concerned. Second sector is the textile market. Now, India is, India has got a huge demographic dividend. There is a big working population as well. And our textile exporters were badly hit after Trump imposed tariffs on us. So this is going to open up the market for India's exporters in the textile and the garment industry. Currently, EU has got, EU has put an import duty of about 10% on Indian textiles and garments. Under this FTA, that is likely to go down, which means Indian exporters of garments and textiles are going to become competitive, like Bangladesh and Vietnam. Right now, if you buy, say, for example, a lot of these foreign brands and their apparel, they are either made in Bangladesh, Vietnam, or made in India. So a lot of chunk has been going to these markets. But within this trade deal that we are going to get, this 10% duty is going to come down. So it's going to be great news for our textile and garment manufacturers as well. So these two sectors, of course, are going to greatly benefit. Apart from that, there are other sectors as well, because in total, we are talking about a market access of about 2 billion people that this mother of all deals is going to open up.
Right. Let me also go across to Professor Nalapat. Now, this is more than a trade agreement. This speaks volumes about the diplomatic relationship as well. And it's not just, the economic partnership. There are factors like investment protection, intellectual property rights, sustainability commitments that broadly defines the framework.
Look, the fact of the matter is India has got a very good record on protecting IPR, intellectual property rights, unlike China, which is well known, frankly, for having stolen technology wherever it can get it. borrow or steal wherever it can, and then clone a product and make that product competitive in US and the EU markets. So India has been very different. India has rigorously protected any kind of intellectual property of other countries, and Indians have been the same. Indians working in the tech sector have not revealed whatever they are working on to even to India, the home country, whereas the Chinese, especially because those who have got family back in the PRC, they are basically forced to reveal everything to China. And whenever they travel to visit their families, they have also got to share these trade secrets. So we have a very good record in these matters. And I can tell you, as far as Indian tech is concerned, Germany was the first to wake up to the importance of Indian tech long before other countries did. But today, more and more people are waking up to that importance, because the fact is, Indian tech, Indian minds, they were not just, as you say, grunts doing the donkey work. They were producing first-class IT technology, first-class IT software, and the number of them is legion. So India can make a very valuable contribution to the EU and help the EU develop its own tech sector. At the same time, the EU can use India as a base to produce components for several of its cars and make them more competitive. EU is an extremely high-cost manufacturing economy. India relatively is a very, very low-cost manufacturing economy. And as a consequence, India can definitely manufacture a lot of components. And India has shown its technology in manufacturing a lot of components.
Absolutely.
You may know that several of the foreign cars that we are buying, a lot of components are
and you know, not just a market. Europe is not just looking at India as a market, but also thinking about its Indo-Pacific and global strategy. I'll come back to you to discuss more on that. We also have former diplomat Ashok Sajjanhar joining us on the broadcast. What are your thoughts on how this FTA is beyond the confines of trade and the symbolism, the presence of the top leadership of EU during the Republic Day celebration?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you've put your finger on the pulse, because that is what it is. I feel it is not, everyone is touting it as the mother of all deals, which of course it is. When people speak about 2 billion population, 25% sort of, of global GDP, 1/3 of global trade, etc., etc., all that is fine. But there is a narrative that goes much beyond that. And that narrative is about trust. And that trust is a commodity that has been in very short supply over the last few months, particularly last 1 year. So as far as the European Union is concerned, it is having problems, whether it is on security or it is on trade with the United States. It is also having problems with China. There is supply chain disruption. There is too much of dependence on China. China just released its figures, and it has more than $1 trillion of trade surplus last year. That means all the other countries are having huge trade deficits with China. So they want balanced trade with China. There is also the weaponization of supply chains that started around the COVID-19 pandemic. And now it has gone on to other things which are more critical, more crucial, which you can't get from anywhere, which are the critical minerals, etc. So I think it is it is not only a trade relationship that we are engaging, it is a strategic partnership. Although we did sign the strategic partnership way back in the early 2000s, but this is the fruition of that strategic partnership, because it is a win-win result for both of them. It is not only the trade deal that is being signed, not only FTA, not only investment, not only geographical indications of origin, but it's also security and defense, and it is also mobility. The challenges, Swati, what we are facing in the United United States, both on trade and on the H-1B. Both of these are sought to be taken care of as far as European Union is concerned. You saw what was the top item on the agenda when Mr. Merz was visiting India recently. He wanted Indian talent. And in fact, it is the Indian talent which has gone to get preeminence and dominance for the US high-tech in globally. And if they shun Indian talent, I think they'll be shooting themselves in the foot, and it'll be to their own disadvantage. So I think here, of course, there are challenges. When two big countries, they come together, there'll be challenges of the agriculture, some of the dairy products, challenges of the carbon tax, etc. Those are issues that we have to discuss and we have to resolve. But I think for the time being, both sides have said, whether it is differences over Ukraine, whether it is differences over Russian purchase of Russian oil, or it is over CBAM, we are going to put it to one side and just take what are the, this is what strategic autonomy is all about.
Right.
This is what multi-alignment is all about, that you look where you can cooperate, look where you can collaborate and take it forward and deal with the areas of difference in due course.
Absolutely. When you talk about a multilateral world, it cannot be decided on the basis of isolating a particular country. It has to be brought together through such trade deals and increased cooperation. Let me quickly also go across to Hina for a moment there. Hina, manufacturing sector in India has been a concern raised by the opposition as well. Ashok Sajjanar was talking about supply chain diversification. We're given to understand that is going to only strengthen India's position as the global manufacturing and sourcing hub.
Well, absolutely. And also, if you look at the kind of statements that the European Commission chief has made about India, now they are also very significant. And those who keep talking about India being a dead economy also must listen to these statements and also pay attention to how countries want to have trade deals with India. What did she say? She said that India's success is important for the global stability. Couple of days ago, we heard IMF also saying that India is a key engine in the global market. So these statements also tell you a lot about the potential that India really carries, even though there is turbulence around the world, but still people are looking at India for the opportunities it brings, for the kind of consumers that we have right now. And that's the reason why this kind of a trade deal becomes extremely critical, and it's a win-win. One, we have kept our national interest first. Why am I saying it? Because what we've learned from sources, Swati, is that agriculture sector, which is a politically sensitive issue, an important point, in the negotiations between India and the US trade agreement as well, has been kept out of the free trade pact that India and the European Union are going to be, India and Europe are going to be signing. Right. So we have kept that in mind, India first in mind, and hence, looking our interest first, we have strategically opened sectors that we can, which will also be a boost for, the industries which are there in the country.
Absolutely. Srinjoy, we're looking at those visuals. We can see NSA Ajit Doval, Foreign Minister S. J. Shankar, Commerce and Industries Minister Piyush Goyal. And, just to add a little bit more to the stability point that was being made, that handshake was, significant because it also sends out a message of stability, holding of the hands, not just in terms of the FTA, which is happening, but in terms of how you need to come together to create a multilateral world. The fact that it took 2 decades to enjoy goes on to show that the negotiations certainly were not easy.
No, it wasn't easy, but there's something else. Trade is now going to be just a small part of it, a big part actually, but there are other parts. Now, what we know is that the External Affairs Ministry has been in touch with the Defense Ministry of India in South Block, and the idea is to have more defense cooperation between India and the EU. Now, that is something that is going to be looked at. What we know is that the Defense Ministry has been in touch with the External Affairs Ministry. The idea of having, let's say, another or more naval ships in the Indian Ocean, more exercises, a more similar activity between the EU warships and Indian warships. That is something that can be looked at. Even closer defense ties between the EU per se and India will work. Sure, India and France have good ties. India and Germany have good ties. India and Italy have good ties. But there is going to be further discussion because the defense ministry is looking at all the banned companies, all the companies that have been banned by India, and one of them is a German company. Now these companies could be looked at again. The bans could be lifted again, like Leonardo. And then if that happens, then there can be closer ties between the EU countries and India. Now, for instance, if this German firm that is currently banned, if the ban is lifted, that company, part of the EU, can work with Indian firms in India to build in India, to make in India. So these are things that are being looked at very seriously.
Absolutely. Professor Nalapat, do you agree that now we have two examples? On one hand, weaponization of trade. On the other, trade just being used as a building block or a foundational block for true integration?
I fully agree. And the fact of the matter is that we have got a huge demographic dividend. We have got very young people, and we have to ensure our education comes up to standard. At present, some universities are definitely up to standard, in fact, higher than standard, and are going worldwide, but many of them are not. So we have to ensure that our education system is up to date. And frankly, it's very, very good that we have a lot of contacts with the EU, because then we begin to use EU standards in wherever we go. The fact of the matter is this demographic dividend can be of immense value to the European Union, which frankly has got a very bad demographic base, as for example has Japan. Japan too, I think, is looking very much at Indians. Why? Because India does not bring a security risk, unlike the Chinese. I mean, how many cases have you heard of Indian espionage, that is Indian Germans or Indian Americans committing acts of espionage? You've heard a lot of cases involving Chinese Americans, but not Indian Americans. And of course, part of the reason is the blackmail that's taken place by the CCP leadership by basically holding hostage the relatives and friends inside China. So there's no question that this kind of a deal is the mother of all deals. And frankly, it will make EU products affordable in markets where it has not yet penetrated. And it will make India a much more important manufacturing hub for the EU. And I think already we have got some companies that are emerging as a manufacturing center for EU manufacturers, especially in defense. And I think we are going to get much more. So overall, I would say it is a win-win. It is a mother of all deals. And no wonder Ursula von der Leyen posted on a social media platform, long live India EU friendship. That's absolutely a right sentiment.
Right. Okay, we are looking at the live visuals from Hyderabad House. We can